session, which is a panel discussion about cross-border mergers and acquisitions, what kind of problems people have run into in the past, how things are changing, and what can we expect as a result of these reforms, which are going to open up new sectors of the Chinese economy and allow more Chinese investment in Britain and abroad. As we know, recently there was a big story about Chinese power companies investing in the Hinkley nuclear power plant in Britain, one of the biggest and I think the only such investment in the world. So this is going to be a very hot topic. If everyone at the back there could come in, we can start. I've got two guests with me who are each going to give a 10-minute talk, and then we're going to have some questions which I'll pose, and then we'll throw it open to the floor. So I'd like to start with Steve Kendall-Smith on my left, who works for Lenovo, which is the world's largest PC company. This, as you remember, used to be called the Legend Computer Company, a Chinese indigenous computer manufacturer, which then bought over IBM's PC operations and is now very much a global company. And Steve is the enterprise and public sector sales leader for Lenovo in the UK and Ireland. And that means he's had an experience of what these cross-border acquisitions are like at the coalface, what it's like to work in a Chinese company. So perhaps before I turn to Andre on my right, who lives in Beijing, runs his own investment company, I'm going to give the floor to Steve, and when he's finished, it'll be your turn, Andre. So, yeah, well, you can just stay here if you want, if you feel more comfortable.
I'll be.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be here. I guess, you know, the expression think globally and act locally is a phrase that's often used by global companies. I'm not sure that many of them really mean it, though. I actually joined Lenovo about 3 years ago. At that time, it was the fourth largest PC company in the world. It had revenues of about $15 billion per year. Today, we're the world's largest PC company with revenues of $35 billion. So in just 3 years, we've more than doubled the business. And I think that we've achieved this incredibly fast growth by thinking globally and acting locally. As Jasper just said, you know, the company was formed in China, and we're very proud of that Chinese heritage. But Lenovo today is truly a global, local company. And our most valuable business operations are placed strategically around the world. For example, our global leadership team is very balanced. The top 10 leaders in our company are from 6 different countries, 6 different nationalities. We have 2 headquarters, one in Beijing and one in the US, and we trade in 160 different companies around the world. And we tap into global expertise. We have our major research centers are in Japan, Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and in the US. And, you know, we're not imitating, we are innovating. I don't know whether any of you saw, we launched a new tablet. We signed up our newest Lenovo engineer is a guy called Ashton Kutcher, who you may know. We got him to launch it for us on Wednesday. And this is truly innovative. You're going to see some TV adverts that start off in a sea of sameness, and our tablet has twice as much battery power as anybody else's. It's thinner than the latest fruit-based product that you may have seen. And it's truly innovative. We're not copying anybody else here. So we've got manufacturing facilities. We have 6 manufacturing facilities in China, but we also manufacture in India, in Mexico, in Brazil, and in the US. And we also contract some of our manufacturing to other locations around the world. So, for example, in Europe, we use a contractor to assemble PCs for us in Europe, which is based in Hungary. So our Chairman Lou, formed the Legend company in 1984 with $25,000 and 10 engineers. In 1990, they built their first PC, and just 6 years later, they were the market leader in China. In 2005, Legend acquired the company that invented the PC, the IBM PC company, and Lenovo was created. It's quite an interesting story that the senior execs flew to Morrisville in the US. The managers that they found there and the employees were terrified. They thought that all their jobs were moving to China. When they got back home, all the local employees and managers in China were also terrified. They thought all their jobs were moving to the US. The truth is that neither happened, and what was created was a global company that acted locally. So today, our company operates without any walls or organizational structures to harness the power of that innovation across the globe. And you're probably thinking, well, yeah, I can see that in the world of IT, which is pretty dynamic. You might be thinking, yeah, I can see how that might work. But I can assure you, I worked for Fujitsu, actually, for many years before joining Lenovo. And, you know, at any senior meeting, there was always a Japanese guy in the room just keeping an eye on us. Before that, in the 1990s, I worked for Dell Computer Corporation. And all the senior execs were American. Actually, most of them were from the same town. They were from Austin in Texas. And at the first sign of any problems in any region, what did they do? They sent an American guy to go and fix it. So they talked about thinking globally and acting locally, but actually they didn't really mean it. And I know people that work at Samsung today who say that at every single management level, there is a Korean person there just making sure that everything is being done. For me, this is not the way to innovate. This is not thinking globally and acting locally. I think that companies need to set a very clear global strategy that can be translated at a local level. And Lenovo, for the past 16 quarters, has outgrown our competition in every one of those quarters. And I think we've done that by having a very, very simple global strategy that every employee can understand, everyone can articulate it, but it can be, and by the way, that strategy is protect and attack. So protect our existing business, our existing markets, attack the new markets, develop new markets. And that's very easily translated at a local level. So my sales team have specific actions that go to meeting that global strategy. So that's it from me for this opening part. But I would just like you to remember that. Think globally, act locally, because it really does drive innovation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'd now like to introduce Loesekrug-Pietri, if I pronounced that correctly, who really is one of these global masters of the universe. He's founded this his own private equity fund based in China, which is introducing Chinese investors to European companies. He's had investments in the Club Mediterranee and Bang & Olufsen and other companies, and he's going to talk to us a bit about what he's been doing, and then we're going to talk a bit about what the future for Chinese investments abroad is, and whether the old models of foreign investment in China are still valid. So I'll give the floor to you.
先生们、女士们，下午好。Don't worry, I'm only going to do that in English. Thank you, Jasper, for the introduction. I don't know which master of the universe you talked about, but it's clearly not me. But what we try to share, and I hope to keep it in 10 minutes, is a little bit of experience of working both with UK and European companies welcoming Chinese investments, and Chinese companies trying and sometimes successfully achieving investment overseas. So just that you know who we are, I'm going to spend half a minute, not half an hour, don't worry, on how we work. Very simple, we are an investment fund. We have offices in Beijing and in Brussels. We invest only in Europe in order to help European companies be successful in China. And the very interesting point is that today the real topic in Europe, in the US, everywhere in the world is not about financing, because financing is still plentiful, but it's really about growth. How do you grow your companies? I mean, I think you mentioned that, our colleague from Lenovo mentioned that very eloquently. How do you create jobs by this growth? How do you create value for the communities in which you are? And we think that is really the topic about China. It's not about a big pot of money. It's about the huge market that China is representing and is representing more and more. So what we do is we invest, and in order to be able to create this growth in China for the companies in Europe in which we invest, we always piggyback with us a Chinese co-investor. So for us, you have investment funds who use financial leverage. We basically use the strategic leverage brought by our partner. And for our partner, which is in red here, it's an absolutely fantastic way to access companies in Europe which would otherwise be difficult for them to access. We are very young. I mean, we launched less than 2 years ago. We are around 15 people. 2/3 of us are Chinese. 1/3 are Europeans. I have 2 partners. They're both Chinese and myself. Maybe one last point on us. We have the Chinese sovereign fund, Zhongtou, Chinese Investment Corporation, as one of our investors. What I want to tell you about, and it's not going to be diplomatically correct, so I apologize, but I think what is important is that you get our vision, which is what is the real challenge. For us, the first challenge is the perception, and the perception both sides. You probably saw these pictures. Oops. Hold on. There's some slides missing. I think there's okay. There's some slides missing in the presentation. Okay, whatever. Okay, I think I'm going to try to explain that to you. It's a little bit more difficult with this graphic. I don't know if you remember this Time magazine article, which was 1 year ago, where basically you had a cover page about China buying out the world. And the way it was expressed, it was a big Pac-Man, red, with 5 little yellow stars as its eyes, buying up European firms. And I think this is a challenge because I think in Europe there's this perception that Chinese are buying out everything. Obviously, as we know, this is not the case, but I think this is, especially for the Chinese audience here, is very important to understand that today the dream of a lot of entrepreneurs or business owners in Europe is not to have a Chinese boss. And not because they are opposed to that, it's simply because these Chinese firms, and I think Lenovo is an exception, are not at all known. Nobody knows about them. Nobody knows the names that we know when we're in China about these big entrepreneurs who made it. These are unknown. Remember the topic about Huawei? I don't know if there's anybody on Huawei in the room, but Huawei's chairman did his first interview in the press 6 months ago. Obviously, this is very good news because it helps this chairman and this company being much better known today about what is the strategy, what is the ambition, what is the goals. The issue here is that when you do a deal in Europe, it's not just about money. It's about what the media is going to say, what are all the stakeholders going to say, what are the unions going to say, what's the government going to say, what are the employees going to say. And if you don't engage with all of these different shareholders and stakeholders, the risk is that there will be one person who will derail the transaction. But the opposite is true too. The picture I wanted to show you was actually a picture I saw in People's Daily a couple of months ago, where basically you had a guy running in a very small street in Athens, which really looked like worn down. He was wearing very, very old pair of shoes, and the title was "The European Crisis is Deepening." And I would be a Chinese reader, I would read that and I would have the impression, my goodness, Europe is completely bankrupt. All these guys are broke, we need to give them a penny so that they can eat at any unit. And then you come to London, obviously Europe is not London and London is not Europe, but you realize that there's still a lot of wealth here and that the crisis is deep, is very bad for many, many people here, but we are not in a situation where it's starving. So when people come and say, oh, we are going to bring you money and we're going to save you, well, number one, in many cases it's not the case. In many good companies, there's actually a lot of competition from local investors, families, investment funds who are ready to invest, and they are local. They have a local understanding, they have a local connection, which obviously makes it much easier for them to invest. And secondly, and this is probably a little bit more sensitive, we have to recognize that when you have this economic giant like China who emerged in just 10 years, and you have a zone like the Eurozone and the UK who have been badly hit by the crisis in the last years, it's never a good idea to come, you know, with your checkbook full and say we're going to save you, because it risks creating a lot of opposition. You probably hear about the deal, and we are not involved, so I can talk about it, which is happening right now in France, where there's a rumor that Dongfeng might take over 30% of Peugeot, which is one of the... Well, Peugeot might not have a lot of options, but there are a lot of voices saying, oh, what about the technology? Are we not letting go one of our iconic companies? So I think it's going to be very, very difficult for Dongfeng to be accepted as a normal investor. And this is, I would say, I wanted to set a little bit the setting here. So the lessons we learned, in order that we can get to a constructive discussion, are the followings. Number one, I think it's a terrible idea to go for bankrupt companies. Because not only you risk, as a Chinese investor, this perception issue that we mentioned about, which takes a lot of learning, which takes a lot of local management, which takes a lot of interaction. Look at the Hinckley deal that Jasper just mentioned. The fact that the two Chinese companies partnered with a European utility, EDF, was, I think, key. I'm not so sure that the two Chinese companies would have been able to build a nuclear plant in the UK alone. So you need a local partner. And what we discussed just before the forum is, look at what the foreign companies did 30 years ago. When they went to China, they partnered with a local company in a JV. I think when a Chinese company goes out, they need to partner with a local investor. The case of Lenovo is very interesting. They partnered, a very little known fact is they partnered with two investment funds, TPG and General Atlantic, and I'm sure that was important. I don't know how much, I was not in the transaction, to make the deal more acceptable by the local stakeholders, the government, the shareholders, and so on. So going for bankrupt companies is just adding up another layer of complexity. Geely bought Volvo, and I know, even if Li Shufu is an exceptional entrepreneur, that he has a very tough time, he's the chairman of Geely, of turning around the company in Sweden, because it's not his competency to run a company in Sweden. He's very good in China and automotive. And I think a lot of value is probably not created because you don't have, probably I would have gone with a Swedish investor or a German investor or whatever. Secondly, we see a lot of transaction on majority. What means majority? Majority means that you have operational control, that you have the full responsibility, but you also have the full responsibility if something goes wrong. And I think that the risk is that when you have, technology firms, sensitive companies, it's always better to get engaged before full-fledged marriage. And you see some very interesting deals, and I think we should follow companies like Three Gorges, for example, who took a minority deal in the Portuguese utility that was 1.5 years ago. I think this is very smart, because even if the Portuguese had a lot of problems, I'm not sure that they would have sold off majority of the key, company in their country. Investing alone, I think we already mentioned that, and I think we see increasingly number of Chinese company partnering. And this is probably an opportunity for the students here in the room, is that I think there will be a lot of need in Chinese state-owned companies as well as private companies for people who understand the two cultures and who can really be local here in the UK or in Germany, in France, in the US when they invest, but who still have the connection with the mother company. And then, I don't know, are there many, lawyers or investment bankers in the room? If you can just raise your hands, a few. I think this is good news for you, but it's going to take a long time. I know that most of the investment banks have a lot of tough time to justly get paid, because advice, soft skills like that is today not as valued in China yet. So it will take some time for Chinese companies to pay an investment bank, to pay a lawyer, and sometimes it's an investment in order to avoid a risk. The most famous case is TCL buying into Thomson 6 months before televisions moved to flat screens. Probably they would have invested $100,000 or $2,000 in a strategy consultant. They probably would have saved several hundred millions. So I think this is really an advice that we can give. I'm going to finish on this one. I think the real weapon, to come back to what the Chinese firms have really as an asset, is again not the money, is the access to the Chinese market. You probably heard about a deal, and I tried to give you as much concrete example as possible, which was in the US when Shanhui, a very big food company, pork company in China, bought Smithfield, one of the largest pork processor in the US. The idea is not just to expand in the US. It's about the fact that for Smithfield, it's an amazing entry into the Chinese market, which is 50% of the pork consumption. So I think this is really the real weapon, if we can use that in a positive way. And when I hear so many media topics about, we need the Chinese investments because Europe is lacking of cash, this is just completely wrong and probably will bring a lot of mistakes. So really focusing on the growth, and suddenly you will see the doors of a lot of European companies be much more open, because you address their real problem, again, which is not financing, but which is growth. So on this note, I'll hope we have a constructive discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andre. Can we start by looking at how successful the joint ventures of European American companies have been in China to date? Have these investments by Ford or Danone or all kinds of other major multinationals, has Walmart been successful in China? Have these joint ventures where the Chinese state obliged the foreign partner to take on a Chinese partner, have they been successful? Because we've heard a lot of discussion in the past about how the Chinese partner has pursued its own agenda, has stolen technology, has left the foreign partner sort of bleeding by the side of the road when they've decided that they can do it by themselves. So how successful has that old-style partnership been? Do you have any thoughts of that? We were discussing this a bit over lunch.
We were discussing who's taking the sensitive question, so I would love you to take the microphone. But Look, I think there was a very interesting article in the FT a few months ago saying China has opened up since more than 30 years now. China has changed massively in the last 30 years. I mean, I'm only in Beijing since 8 years, and I've seen such a change already. But the model of cooperation between Chinese and foreign firms is still the same. It's the good old-fashioned JV. And when you talk, it made a lot of sense, even for the foreign companies. I think it was more than just a regulation by the state, because you needed to have a local partner to navigate you, to recruit the good people, to get access to your first contract, because most of the firms were state-owned 20 years ago. But this has not changed. And when you look today, the biggest activity of a lot of lawyers in China today is turning JVs into wholly owned foreign enterprises, or having one partner buying out the other one, which is great business, obviously, for them, but that shows that the model needs to evolve. And I think we all need to rethink a right way to work, because we know a lot of cases. I know a case of a very famous German automotive company, which is super successful in China. They have 2 JV partners, one in the north, one in the south. I don't want to be too specific. And when you ask the chairman of the China operation, he tells you, yeah, 20% of my profit, global profits, is coming from China. But the daily management of this joint venture is a nightmare. And if you ask the Chinese counterpart, they will tell you, oh, this great business with the Germans, but my goodness, these Germans, they're tough. I mean, it's difficult. And I think you see in a recent case when Volkswagen did not want to transfer its latest I think injection technology to his Chinese partner, there was a lot of frustrations on both sides. That is, I would say, the good story. But the bad stories, well, you mentioned Danone. I think Danone, probably in 20 years, the shareholders of Danone will still remember that they made a big mistake in this country. I don't know who is responsible, and I'm sure there is mixed responsibility in this story, but probably in 20 years, the shareholders will say this biggest market for food, where consumers are increasingly putting attention to the trust they can bring to their products, especially in the milk, especially in baby food, etc. They missed out on this major opportunity. Have you seen Danone is now trying again with Zhonglian and with COFCO, but they lost 15 years. And Mr. Zhong from Wahaha is now the richest man in China. I'm not sure this is an example of a successful JV. So I think we need to rethink partnerships, and probably one way we try to pursue is that these partnerships need to be done at the global level. So all the partners, the Chinese, the foreigners, have completely aligned interests.
In my industry, in IT, I can't think of any successful JVs. I can think of lots of successful takeovers, but actually true JVs. And in fact, one that I was involved with was Fujitsu and Siemens in the hardware business. And it was really it was a strategy for Siemens to exit the hardware business. And I think that's the problem with JVs. Often there's an agenda there that is about exiting the market rather than, whereas when something is a takeover, it's, everybody has the same agenda. They know what the end result, what success looks like.
Going back to this issue then of Chinese companies investing in Europe and other parts of the world. I mean, one of the things I often heard when I was living in China from foreign diplomats, there was something fundamentally unfair and one-sided, because under Chinese rules and regulations, a foreign investor was forbidden to buy land or to buy into certain strategic industries. Most things were closed to the foreign investor. But on the other hand, Chinese investors were free to buy strategic assets abroad. They could buy land, they could buy into nuclear power industries, into telecoms, all kinds of things which the foreign investor was barred from. So there was no bilateralism in this. And a lot of the countries concerned, Western countries, were sort of debating whether this was a good thing or not. And the second thing is a lot of people were concerned that a lot of the investment was not from purely private companies, but from entities which in some way were backed by the Chinese Communist Party. And so there was a great deal of mistrust there. And so I wanted to ask both panel members whether they thought this issue was going to disappear with the sort of coming reforms in China, or do you think this is going to come up again and again? Do you want to take that one first?
This time you need to take the sensitive question.
Okay. Well, I think the short answer is it has to. It has to. You know, if China really wants to be part of, you know, this whole you know, modern global world, then it has to be a two-way street.
How can I say? I've not seen a country like China which is so eager to learn, and obviously, I think what we can learn from China is the way the government is playing it very strategic. I think we need to respect that. There's clearly no reciprocity. Geely can buy Volvo, but probably Volvo cannot buy Geely. It's a fact. But, you know, this is the theory. In reality, I think that today the Chinese firms are not at the level, and they say that themselves. They're very, very humble about it, saying that, you know, our competence today to take over companies in the West is still extremely limited. That's why they are so cautious. I mean, I don't know if you know the numbers, but just to give you a little bit of perspective, Chinese invested last year $80 million overseas. The US companies invested $390 billion overseas, and the EU invested $560 billion. So the tsunami coming from China is still a myth. Now, I think that I think what we are seeing in these last months, that clearly there's the conscience that the economic model needs to be changed. Otherwise, a lot of these Chinese companies, you just have to look at the Chinese companies listed in Shanghai. They are still growing, but the return on equity is extremely low because margins are getting squeezed, the costs are going up, they have no brand or no technology to sustain these margins. So that's why we're going to see more investments, and we're also going to see more opening up, like the free trade zone, etc., which is going towards more liberalization. And as a final point, maybe I think we need to see China not as a picture, where obviously there's a lot of things which are frustrating for foreign firms, but as a movie. And when you look how much it has changed in the last 15 years, I think it's going in the right direction.
Thank you very much. I think that's all the time we have. We're now going to welcome Mr. Wu Changjiang. Before that, I'd like to thank Steve and Andre for their very clear and enlightening answers and for their presentations. Thank you very much for coming. Okay.